He won the war. He beat the greatest, most heavily fortified city of the ancient world using a wooden horse and about 9 years of grinding patience. And after that, it took him another 10 years just to walk through his own front door. Not because the ocean was particularly big, but because a god personally decided that this one specific man, out of everyone who fought at Troy, was never getting home if there was anything he could do about it. Most people only remember the highlights from school or movies, but they're missing about 80% of how genuinely deranged this journey actually was. So let's fix that. Let's start with the man himself, because the twist nobody tells you is that Odysseus was never supposed to be the hero of the Trojan War in the first place. That title belonged to Achilles, unstoppable in battle, dead by the end of the fighting anyway, immortalized forever by his own rage. Odysseus was the guy on the sidelines and that everybody underestimated, king of a small, rocky, unimpressive island called Ithaca, not particularly rich, not particularly strong, famous mostly for being annoyingly clever. He didn't even want to go to Troy to begin with. When the Greek king showed up to recruit him for the war, he faked insanity on the spot, yoking an ox and a donkey together to plow a field, throwing salt into the furrows instead of seeds like a man who'd completely lost it. The recruiter, a guy named Polyphemus who apparently wasn't in the mood for theater that day, wasn't buying it. He placed Odysseus's infant son directly in the path of the plow to test him. Odysseus swerved hard to avoid killing his own kid, and that was that. Insanity act over in front of everyone who mattered. He was going to Troy, whether he liked it or not. He spent the next 10 years there, and by most accounts, he's the reason the Greeks won the whole war, and not through brute strength or skilled swordsmanship, but through lying, which was always his real weapon of choice. The Trojan Horse was his idea, a plan so stupid on paper it worked precisely because no actual soldier would ever try it. Build a giant wooden horse, hide your best men inside it, tell the enemy you're giving up and sailing home for good, then wait for them to drag your own weapon of choice through their front gate out of pure curiosity. It worked. Troy burned to the ground in a single night. War over after 10 years. And this is where the story you think you know actually starts, because the trip home should have taken only a few weeks. Ithaca isn't far from Troy at all. Odysseus had 12 ships and hundreds of seasoned men who just survived the deadliest, longest war of the ancient world and were, in theory, more than ready for a simple sail home. On paper, this was supposed to be the victory lap, the easy part after the hard part was already finished. 10 years later, he arrived alone, on someone else's borrowed boat, with absolutely nothing to show for it. The first mistake was arrogance, and it happened almost immediately before they'd even lost sight of the Trojan coastline. Sailing home, his ships hit the territory of the Cicones, allies of Troy, and Odysseus, riding high off the greatest military trick in recorded history, decided the smart move was to raid their city for supplies. His men sacked the town, grabbed what they wanted, and Odysseus gave the order to leave before anyone could organize a response. His men ignored him completely. They'd just conquered Troy after 10 brutal years. Obviously, a random coastal town felt like child's play, so instead of retreating, they stayed for one more night, drinking and celebrating on the beach. That single night gave the Cicones enough time to send word inland and call in reinforcements, who came down at dawn in numbers nobody was ready for. The counterattack cost dozens of men in a fight that never needed to happen, over supplies they didn't even need. The first of many examples of a bad decision by men who genuinely thought Troy made them invincible. Keep that in mind because it's the whole theme of the next 10 years. Nearly every disaster that follows either starts with pride or gets made permanently worse by it. Then came a real storm, sent by Zeus according to the text, brutal enough to blow the fleet completely off course for 9 straight days, past the edge of the mapped Greek world entirely. They landed among the equivalent of modern-day hippies, the Lotus eaters, a peaceful people who spent their days in a permanent drugged-out haze from eating the local fruit that grew wild across their island. Odysseus sent 3 scouts ahead to make contact, and the Lotus eaters, being the peaceful people they are, didn't attack. They just offered the fruit as a gesture of hospitality, and the second those men ate it, Ithaca stopped existing for them. No home, no family, no memory of trying to get anywhere at all. Odysseus had to drag his own men back to the ships in chains, all 3 of them sobbing and fighting him the whole way, begging to be left behind. His crew chose permanent oblivion over their own lives without a second thought. That should have been the warning sign for absolutely everything that came next. He sailed on anyway. Next was an island with a cave, and inside that cave lived something enormous. Odysseus and 12 of his men wandered in uninvited, curiosity getting the better of good judgment as usual, and helped themselves to the cheese and milk stored inside while they waited to see who lived there. Then the owner came home, a one-eyed giant named Polyphemus, son of the sea god himself, Poseidon. And the first thing he did upon finding house guests was seal the exit with a boulder no group of men on Earth could ever move. Then he picked up 2 of them, one in each hand, and smashed them against the cave floor like they weighed nothing at all, and ate them, raw, in front of everyone. This was not a great start to island number whatever they were on by now. Here's how they got out. And pay attention because this is the moment that defines Odysseus more than anything else in the entire poem. He got the Cyclops drunk on wine so strong it normally had to be diluted before anyone could safely drink it. And when Polyphemus asked his name, expecting something to brag about later, Odysseus told him it was nobody. A stupid answer. But it's also the reason any of them made it out alive. Once the giant passed out cold, they heated a sharpened sharpened wooden stake in the fire and drove it straight into his one eye, blinding him instantly. Polyphemus screamed loud enough to wake every Cyclops on the island, and when they came running and asked who was hurting him, he gave the only true answer available to him: "Nobody is hurting me." They shrugged, muttered something about him being drunk, and went back to bed. It's one of the oldest recorded jokes in Western literature, and it saved 12 men's lives. Getting out of the cave itself turned out to be the easy part after that. Odysseus strapped his remaining men to the bellies of the giant's own sheep, one man hidden under each animal, and walked all of them straight out the front door past a blind, furious monster who checked every single sheep leaving that morning by feeling nothing but wool on its back. They were free, ship in the water, oars moving, safely out of reach of anything that giant could throw. And Odysseus, unable to help himself, stood up in the boat and screamed his real name back at the monster he'd just blinded. He needed the credit. Polyphemus, now knowing precisely who to blame, staggered to the shoreline and prayed to his father, god of the sea, for one specific thing: make sure this man never gets home. And if he does, by some miracle, make sure he arrives broken, alone, and far too late for any of it to still matter. Poseidon, being a god with nothing but time and who takes his son's suffering personally, heard every word. From that exact second, this stopped being a string of bad luck and became a personal vendetta from one of the most powerful gods alive, running for the next 10 years, entirely, completely preventable. All Odysseus had to do was get in the boat and shut up. Next stop, they reach Aeolus, master of the winds, who handed Odysseus an actual genuine gift: a leather bag containing every storm wind in existence, tied shut, leaving only the one gentle breeze needed to sail straight home. For 9 days, it worked perfectly. Ithaca even came into view on the horizon. Odysseus, who'd been steering the entire time without letting himself sleep, finally allowed his eyes to close. His genius crew, convinced their captain was hoarding stolen treasure in that bag and keeping it from them, opened it while he slept. And who would have thought? Every storm wind on Earth exploded out at once. The ships were blown all the way back to where they'd started, and Aeolus took one look at them limping back into his harbor and refused to help a second time, fully convinced the gods themselves had it out for this crew. They were one night's sleep away from home. What came next wiped out almost the entire fleet in a single afternoon. They pulled into the harbor of the Laestrygonians, a race of cannibal giants, and made the exact same mistake as before: no scouting first. Apparently their former companions who became snacks for Polyphemus taught them nothing. The giants attacked from the cliffs above the harbor, hurling boulders down onto the ships packed together below, crushing them, then spearing the men who tried to swim for it like they were fish. 11 of Odysseus's 12 ships were destroyed in minutes. Hundreds of men gone almost instantly, in an attack nobody saw coming because nobody checked first. Only Odysseus's own ship, which he'd kept anchored outside the harbor purely out of caution, survived. One ship out of 12. That was the entire fleet now. They landed next on the island of the witch goddess Circe. Odysseus split the crew to scout this time, and the group led by his second in command, a man named Eurylochus, found a stone house deep in the forest, smoke rising from the chimney and a woman singing inside. Every man except Eurylochus, who stayed back out of sheer suspicion, walked straight in. Circe fed them, and the moment they'd eaten, she touched each one with her wand and turned them into actual pigs, penned up to be slaughtered later like livestock. Eurylochus sprinted back to the ship, too shaken to even get the story out straight at first. Odysseus went in alone, sword drawn, and on the way through the woods he ran into the god Hermes, who handed him an herb called moly, insisting it was the only thing standing between him and the same fate as the rest of his crew. When Circe touched him with the same wand that had turned 20-some men into livestock and absolutely nothing happened, she reversed the curse on the rest of the crew immediately, apparently rattled enough by a mortal who simply refused to transform. She hosted the survivors for a full year after that. What exactly kept Odysseus there that long, with a wife waiting back home the entire time? The poem itself never quite says out loud, and different translations handle that particular silence very differently depending on who you ask. Eventually it was his own men, not Odysseus, who had to remind their captain that Ithaca still existed. Before letting them go, Circe gave directions that should terrify anyone. Sail to the edge of the underworld itself and talk to the dead, because saying, hey, go sail that way, then turn left and then right after 2 miles was too difficult apparently. Odysseus needed the blind prophet Tiresias, the one spirit down there still capable of clear thought after death, to tell him how to survive whatever was left of the journey. He sailed to the literal entrance of the land of the dead, dug a trench, and filled it with the blood of sacrificed animals, because the ghosts needed blood just to speak coherently at all. Dozens of them crowded around desperate for a sip, including his own mother, who had died of grief waiting for him, news he was receiving for the first time from her own ghost, standing right in front of him. Tiresias gave him the one rule that would define everything left of the journey. Whatever happens, do not touch the sun god's cattle, no matter how hungry they get, no matter what. Next came the Sirens, and everyone remembers the wrong detail about them. They're always drawn as pretty women who sing so nicely. What they actually offer instead, according to the text, is worse than beauty: complete knowledge. Every answer to every question you've ever had, sung straight into your ear. And the price for listening is that you never leave the island, because you starve to death sitting on the rocks, unable to tear yourself away from finally understanding everything. Odysseus wanted to hear it anyway, so he had his men plug their own ears with wax and lash him to the ship's mast, under strict orders in advance to ignore anything he said or did once the singing started, and to tie him tighter if he tried to break free. The Sirens sang. Odysseus, according to the text, screamed screamed and begged and fought against those ropes with everything he had, desperate to throw himself into the water toward that voice. His men, deaf to the song and following his own orders from before, rode straight past without slowing down. Then came a strait with exactly two options, both fatal. Squeezed so close together there was no path through that avoided one entirely. On one side, Scylla, a six-headed monster fused permanently into a cliffside cave, each head on its own long serpentine neck, guaranteed to snatch and eat 6 sailors, one per head, the instant a ship drifted within reach. On the other, Charybdis, a whirlpool that swallowed the sea itself 3 times a day, capable of pulling an entire ship and every man aboard straight down in one violent gulp. Tiresias had already done the math back in the Underworld, cold and final. Lose 6 men to Scylla, or lose the whole ship and everyone on it to Charybdis. Odysseus steered towards Scylla on purpose and told absolutely nobody why. He couldn't. Tiresias had warned him that if the crew knew a monster was about to start plucking them off the deck one at a time, the panic alone could sink the ship before Scylla even got the chance. So he stood at the helm, armed and completely useless against something no weapon could touch, and watched 6 of his own men get snatched screaming off the deck one after another, and said nothing about why any of it had happened until the screaming had already stopped. By the time they reached the sun god's cattle, the crew was down to scraps of what left Troy, starving, exhausted, and furious. Odysseus made everyone swear an oath before they even set foot on the island, remembering Tiresias' warning word for word. Then the wind died completely and trapped them there for a full month, food gone, forced to fish and hunt seabirds just to survive, while a herd of untouchable sacred cattle grazed within arm's reach the entire time. Odysseus fell asleep, exhausted from praying for a wind that never came. His men, starving past the point of caring about consequences, broke the oath and slaughtered several of the cattle while he slept. Exactly the one thing Tiresias had specifically told them not to do. The sun god was furious enough to threaten shining his light on the dead instead of the living, unless he got justice for it, and he got it. The moment they set sail again, good old Zeus personally struck the ship with lightning, splitting it apart in open water and drowning every single man aboard. Everyone, except Odysseus, who clung to a broken piece of the mast and drifted alone for 9 days with no ship, no crew, and no food, until he washed up, barely conscious, on the shore of a nymph named Calypso. Every man who'd sailed out of Troy with him, every single one who'd cheered when that horse rolled through the gates, was now dead. Calypso kept him on that island for 7 years. Not exactly a prisoner. She offered him immortality, godhood, forever with her in a private paradise. No aging, no dying, no more disasters. If he'd just forget Ithaca the way the Lotus Eaters forgot everything without even trying. He said no. 7 years, sitting on that beach every single day staring at the water, turning down an offer most people on Earth, Odysseus especially, would take in half a second, because he wanted to go home to a wife he hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades, and a kingdom that, for all he actually knew, had already erased him completely. It was only after the gods finally forced Calypso's hand, ordering her to let him go whether she liked it or not, that Odysseus sailed off on a makeshift raft he'd built himself, straight into one more storm from a Poseidon who apparently still hadn't let this go after everything, and washed up naked and half-drowned on the shore of the Phaeacians, a seafaring people known for their hospitality and their genuinely excellent ships. There, as an honored guest nobody recognized, fed and clothed and treated with more kindness than he'd seen in years, he finally told his own story out loud for the first time, start to finish. The entire nightmare from Troy to that exact beach. They were moved enough by what they heard to give him a ship, a real one this time, and sail him the rest of the way home themselves, no strings attached. He landed on Ithaca after 20 years away, and Athena, who'd been steering things from a careful distance the whole journey, disguised him as a broken old beggar before he'd even reached his own front door. Not a clever trick this time, but a genuine warning. Over 100 armed men were currently living in his house, eating his food, and if the actual king of Ithaca walked in and announced himself on day 1, he'd be dead before dinner was served. The only one that recognized him instantly was his dog. Argos, a hunting hound Odysseus had raised and trained himself as a puppy right before leaving for Troy 20 years earlier, was now ancient, flea-ridden, and dumped on a manure pile outside the palace because nobody bothered caring for a dog that useless anymore. But when Odysseus walked past, disguised as a total stranger, Argos lifted his head at the sound of a voice he apparently still remembered after 2 full decades, managed one last weak wag of the tail, and died right there on the dung heap, the only living thing on the entire island that recognized its king on sight. Odysseus, forced to keep the disguise up in front of the suitors, had to turn his face away and wipe his eyes without anyone noticing. His wife, meanwhile, stood feet away from him in that same room, looked directly at the disguised beggar sitting at her table, and felt nothing at all. Penelope, still unaware, finally announced a contest to settle the whole mess. Whoever could string Odysseus's old hunting bow and shoot an arrow clean through a row of 12 axe heads would win her hand. Every suitor tried. Every suitor failed, most of them unable to even bend the thing enough to get it strung in the first place. Then the disguised old beggar asked for a turn, and the room erupted in laughter and insults at the sheer nerve of it. He picked up the bow anyway, strung it in one smooth motion like he'd done it 1,000 times before, and put the arrow clean through all 12 without missing. Then he turned the bow on the room. With his son Telemachus, a loyal herdsman, and one faithful old servant, all of whom had already recognized him privately in the hours before, Odysseus had made sure every other weapon in the hall was locked away, and every exit was barred shut. The suitors, unarmed and packed into their own banquet hall, understood what was happening only after the first arrow had already found its target. What followed wasn't a fair fight. It was a slaughter, deliberate and total. 4 men against over 100 with nowhere left to run. When it was over, every single suitor who'd spent years eating his food and courting his wife was dead on the floor of his own great hall. He'd survived a war, a curse from the god of the sea, cannibal giants, a witch, the underworld itself, sirens, a 6-headed monster, a whirlpool, and 7 years trapped on an island with a goddess who wanted to keep him forever, only to get home and find out the real fight was still waiting for him behind his own front door. Even after the bloodshed, even after her own son and the entire household confirmed his identity, Penelope still wasn't convinced. 20 years is a long time, faces change, and men lie for a living in this story specifically. So she tested him one final time, ordering a servant to carry their marriage bed out of the bedroom and set it up in the hall for him to sleep on, as if it were just another piece of furniture. Odysseus, who had stayed composed through 20 years of monsters, gods, and grief, finally lost his patience completely. He snapped that the bed could not be moved, full stop, because he'd built it himself decades earlier, constructing the entire bedroom around a living olive tree still rooted in the ground, using the trunk itself as one of the bedposts. Cut down that tree and there was no bed left to carry anywhere. It was a detail literally impossible for an imposter to know. The moment he said it, Penelope's knees gave out and she finally ran to him. He won the war in 10 years. He got home in another 10. And the truth is, none of that was fate. It was his own mouth that did the rest. Every real catastrophe in this story starts the exact same way. Someone needed to be right, needed the credit, needed one more night of celebrating, one more boast on the way out the door, one more thing that could have just been left alone and wasn't. The monsters didn't beat him, neither did the gods. He mostly beat himself over and over for 20 straight years, and somehow made it home anyway. Older, smaller, and finally quiet enough to let it happen. He didn't return as a king. He returned as a warning that sometimes the only thing standing between you and everything you ever wanted is the person looking back at you in the mirror.